Lightning claws the sky, briefly illuminating Lyle, seated lotus in spandex on the towel dispenser, leaning forward. The idle resistance machines look insectile in the lightning's brief light. Lamont Chu, glabrous and high gloss in a white towel and wristwatch, haltingly confesses to an increasingly crippling obsession with tennis fame. His wrists are so thin he wears his watch halfway up his forearm, which looks sort of gladiatorial. Lyle sucks his cheeks. He's thinking as hard as you. It's like he's you in the top of a clean pond. It's part of the attention. Lamont, are you willing to listen to a remark about what is true? Okie dokie. The truth will set you free, but not until it is finished with you. You burn with hunger for food that does not exist. Fame is not the exit from any cage. So I'm stuck in the cage from either side? There's no way out? You might consider how escape from a cage must surely require foremost awareness of the cage. Infinite Jest is absolutely riddled with cages. There's an awareness of the cage that brings us to a different cage. What is there left once you are aware of this other cage? Are we entrapped and stagnant in this moment? It perfectly conveys the kind of absurdity of postmodernism sometimes, enlightenment delivered from an impossible place. Postmodernism is both important and destructive. On one hand, its recognition of the instability of language, its suspicion of totalizing narratives, and its acknowledgement of the relationship between knowledge and power has brought us something, has brought us knowledge of these things that weren't there before. However, on the other hand, deconstruction is by nature destructive. We've dismantled so much that we're kind of in this barren landscape, unsure how to move forward. Jean-François Lyotard argues that postmodern is not a period that comes after modern. The postmodern is that which exists within the modern itself. Following him, I do believe that we are in a postmodern condition still. In this video, I will discuss the historical and philosophical movements that led to postmodernism, discuss what postmodernism actually accomplished, and then ask what discoveries are left, because I do not believe all hope is lost. World War I and the interwar period belonged mostly to the modernists. Modernism lamented a loss of unity, but postmodernism, growing out of it, kind of just asked, why was unity the narrative in the first place? In literature, it was suspicious of these grand totalizing narratives that we wove about ourselves. For example, in Balzac's La Comédie Humaine, or in Victoria-era novels like The Scarlet Letter, or even in modernism like Kafka's The Trial. These works, of course, all have nuances, but they're trying to convey these deep human truths. In 1979, Jean-François Lyotard wrote The Postmodern Condition, and he talked about a bunch of stuff and diagnosed the postmodern condition, and then later he kind of recanted a lot of it and was really kind of lamenting the fact that this is the most famous of his works. He says that readers and writers ought to wage a war on totality. Let us be witnesses to the unpresentable, and take a postmodern stance of incredulity towards meta-narratives. The Enlightenment narrative of inevitable moral progress becomes much more difficult to sustain after we witness the horrors of World War II, the Holocaust, the atomic bombs, and everything. Theodor Adorno famously said that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric. The Second World War ends, and the Cold War begins. In 1947 to about 1991, the United States and the Soviet Union were embroiled in this war of threats. Postmodernism, we generally agree, starts in the 1960s or thereabouts. The Cold War era produced some of the highest rates of consumerism in all of U.S. history. As Emily Rosenberg writes in her chapter of Cambridge's The Cold War Volume 3, capitalist-made consumer goods often seem both the symbols and substance of freedom. Image after image linked the rapid implosion of communist Soviet power to the triumph of consumerism that represents these democratic free market systems. And television exponentially increases that question. As Woon-Jong Kim writes and cites in his article, Television and American Consumerism, historians and media scholars claim that the new medium of television, with its unprecedented advertising power, was a crucial catalyst that drew the American dream away from ideals and instead towards a, quote, national ethos of consumption. So visually and economically, people were consuming things more than ever. Things were being commodified. Culture was being commodified. And in addition to culture being commodified, culture and art was being politicized and weaponized. Propaganda and mass media became central political tools meant to manipulate the masses, which it did. Michel Foucault, across many texts, Discipline and Punish, The Order of Things, The History of Sexuality, on and on and on, says that knowledge and truth is something that is historically produced and oppressed and organized and mediated by systems of power. Whatever a particular society accepts as truth cannot be natural, it cannot be universal. The Cold War proves Foucault right, and it compounds the questions of postmodernism. People, in addition to just surviving in the day-to-day and fearing for their lives, had to parse out what was simulacra and what was not. Simulacra is a term that comes from Jean Baudrillard's work. In response to simulacra, postmodern artists adopted this ironic stance, which we have inherited today. So instead of making art that was genuinely engaging with the world around them, it took on a stance of parody, of pastiche, of mockery, to make these political statements of suspicion against the government's narratives. So let's go into what did it actually accomplish. I want to contrast a modernist work and a postmodernist work by way of two passages so that we can see the difference in what worlds they were building and discussing. Let's read the second stanza of The Wasteland. What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images where the sun beats, and the dead tree gives no shelter, the cricket no relief, and the dry stone no sound of water. Only there is shadow under this red rock. Come in under the shadow of this red rock, and I will show you something different from either your shadow at morning striding behind you, or your shadow at evening rising to meet you. I will show you fear and a handful of dust. The first images question what it is that can grow out of this stony rubbish, what we have left, what world we are left in after the First World War, which reminds me of Yeats's final lines in The Second Coming. Now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast its hour come round at last slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. In The Wasteland we have the Son of Man. In The Second Coming, we have the Son of God. These are two sons that are inherited and coming to and reckoning with the world around them. And of course, in The Second Coming, instead of Jesus Christ, it's this rough beast. What the Son of Man must now face is this heap of images and death at every turn. And Eliot, like Yeats, paints this rather pessimistic portrait, to say the least, of the world that we're in, or rather that the modernists were in. But there are still things to show, and there is still perhaps a world to be recovered. The speaker is inviting us under the red rock. The speaker is inviting us to engage, whereas in Gravity's Rainbow, we get a very different idea. The first passage in Gravity's Rainbow is, "A screaming comes across the sky. It has happened before, but there is nothing to compare it to now. It is too late. The evacuation still proceeds, but it's all theater. There are no lights inside the cars, no light anywhere. Above him lift girders old as an iron queen, and glass somewhere far above that would let the light of day through, but it's night. He's afraid of the way the glass will fall soon. It will be a spectacle. The fall of a crystal palace, but coming down in total blackout, without one glint of light, only great invisible crashing." So you can see from Pynchon's fragmented imageries, we're going back and forth between the protagonist's desire for light and his wonderings, his imaginings of what the situation would be if there were light, with the acknowledgement that there isn't. There's this desire for light, for knowledge, for truth, for understanding, yet we know we're in the dark and that there's no escaping it. In fact, the third line? From the beginning, we are told it is too late, yet the novel goes on for almost another 800 pages. And this crisis is existential in two ways. Number one, Slothrop is really existentially fearing for his literal existence. This rocket, his bomber is going to come, and it might kill him. It might kill everybody. But two, his understanding of what the world is. And notice it also alludes to this sense that we are doing things to dole out comfort or such, but it's all simulacra. It says the evacuation still proceeds, but it's all theater. Theater is fake. Theater is to conjure emotions in a safe place. It's not real. None of this is real anymore, yet this is the world in which we have to live. One thing I noticed that as I was thinking about comparing these two passages is the fact that one is poetry and one is prose. I don't think we ought to take that for granted because although there was some postmodernist poetry, particularly John Ashbery's Self-Portrait in a Convex Mirror, that was extremely lauded, postmodernism was really more of a novelistic form. When I think of modernism, I think of The Wasteland, which is a poem. I think of Wallace Stevens. I think of the Cantos. I think of William Carlos Williams. I think of a lot more, writers, but a lot of them are poets. Whereas for postmodernism, I think of mostly novelists. I think of Pynchon's Gravity's Rainbow and V and Vineland, and I think of David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest and Italo Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. And there's something to that. I think we ought to pay attention to what form is telling us. Novels are prose, of course, except, Nabokov, Pale Fire, but novels typically are prose. And prose most similarly simulates the type of media that people were consuming. Television, ads, newspapers, it's all prose, it's not poetry. And so it gives us this sense that we are in a world we understand, yet we're not. The wool is being pulled over our eyes in one way, and at least in particular in Gravity's Rainbow, because I don't think the narrator is on our side. And in postmodernism, we're talking about these systems of representation that proliferate more quickly than we are able to understand. If we're trying to link form and content, which good literature always does, then we're talking about places wherein we get lost in all these words, right? We're getting lost in the world. There's this overload of information. Also think something in particular to Gravity's Rainbow that discusses this is the fact that we're talking about the V-2 bombers, which despite being less accurate, were silent, and therefore people didn't know where they landed until they landed. And as a result, the idea is that the invisible, which pushes us into our innermost corners of our minds, our most fearsome corners, in which our minds get to proliferate and elaborate on images that are not even there, the absence of things can be scarier than the presence of things. Because when the enemy is standing there right in front of you, they are as they seem to you. Whereas when your imagination can confabulate and expand on all these images, it can go exponentially scarier than otherwise. In addition to the fear of an invisible external enemy, there also is this terrifying recognition that the enemy might be within. That the consumerism that's being pushed on us, that we are literally and figuratively buying into, is our own government manipulating us into being pawns for their ideology and politics. That leads us to paranoia, to ironic stances, to not trusting things. And what else are we to do in the face of these horrors? I think that we laugh. Because while Gravity's Rainbow is talking about these incredibly difficult times and moments, these terrifying things, we're also simultaneously talking about one man's paranoia about how his erections relate to locations and timings of bombings. So there's this parody, there's this humor and comedic sense of things that runs throughout the whole thing, this dark humor. Crazy protagonists like King Lear or like Hamlet all laugh at themselves, often to the discomfort of others. For them, laughter is the response to encountering the dark and meaningless abyss. Postmodernism takes the power of this laughter from their protagonists and shifts the burden to the reader. The reader, as well as the protagonists, have to deal with this discomfort and laugh at ourselves and parse through what is this craziness? Who is the crazy person in this situation? Is Slothrop unduly paranoid, or does he have some sense of reason? And how do we know? And can we even know? Critic René Girard argues that laughter, like tears, can form an authentic, cathartic experience in the Aristotelian sense, because catharsis includes both religious purification and medical purgation. This kind of tragic cathartic laughter is an emotional and physical manifestation of the crisis of the subject that's happening both within the diegetic layer, within the plot, and beyond it with the writer and the reader. Laughter also creates this deeper sense of crisis because, as a paroxysm, it threatens the autonomy and self-possession of the one who laughs uncontrollably. The irony and humor then is reflexive. It ought to bring the reader to an uncomfortable laughter when we purge ourselves while realizing our paralyzed state. We laugh, but we are bound to these systems of signs, institutions, technologies, and languages that mediate our reality even as we encounter it. We are in the cage. It is inescapable and always already present in every act of communication. The act which connects us to other people also somehow imprisons us. And that paralysis that postmodernism does so well to elucidate, it also creates and proliferates. Many of the postmodern assumptions have become the background conditions of our everyday lives. Postmodernism gave us a necessary skepticism. Beware of ideology, beware of authority, beware of simplistic origin narratives, beware of the natural and the obvious. But the cost is that suspicion can be totalizing. It can be overwhelming. Eventually, irony can turn from a tool of critique into a permeation and omnipresence in the everyday. And this is true. Irony has been pushed to its limit nowadays. I'm not going to go into a tangent about this because there are two already really good videos made about this that I will link in the description. One by JReg and the other by Alison Villa. So we're paralyzed in this ironic state, and I think it's also telling that we really haven't had a serious intellectual or literary movement after postmodernism. So postmodernism won, but in winning, it exhausted itself. And I wonder whether with literature becoming so good at critiquing meaning, whether it became unable to create meaning. We may end up with more questions than answers, which is okay. In Letters to a Young Poet, Rilke, one of the greatest poets of the 20th century, wrote, "Don't search for the answers which could not be given to you now, because you would not be able to live them. And the point is to live everything. Live the questions now. Perhaps then, someday far in the future, you will gradually, without even noticing it, live your way into the answer." My first wondering is about where the nature of the self is headed. The contemporary person is no longer just an individual mind shaped by a society. It's a node within a network of social media and technologies and algorithms and artificial intelligence and information systems. So the next literary question might be, where does the self end and the network begin? It might induce another kind of postmodernist or modernist looking like crisis. I haven't had social media for the past 7 years. And I personally still fear this question because even though I don't feel fragmented into different identities by way of social media, which I used to when I did have it, I fear the fact that my information is deeply bound within systems like my files are on my iCloud drive, my writing is on my Google Drive, my photos are on another drive. And as a result, I am part of this network unwittingly or wittingly. Somebody writing from the position that we are in right now might have a new and interesting take on it that hasn't fully developed yet because these things are in fact so recent. On the other side of that question is the body. If everything is discourse, where is the body? What is irreducibly human when everything is in contention? Let me return to Rilke for a second. Indulge me, please. Mental creation, too, arises from the physical, is of one nature with it, and only like a softer, more enraptured, and more eternal repetition of bodily delight. The thought of being a creator, of engendering, of shaping, is nothing without its continued great confirmation and embodiment in the world. Embodied experience is inevitable in our everyday lives until somebody uploads their consciousness to the cloud, which might happen. Attention is the thread that connects these two major points, because all contemplation of problems and questions of representation go out the window if we can't pay attention long enough to consider them. I think that in our world, attention is an existential action. Reading is an existential act. With the rise of TikTok and Instagram Reels and now YouTube Shorts, YouTube has even changed its interface to privilege shorts over long-form media. Then everything is trying to fracture our attention, and reading is not. Reading does the opposite. And the fragmentation of attention is very helpful and important to those in power, not alluding to any crazy conspiracies or anything, but if no one can pay attention or read closely, both literarily and culturally, then who is going to stand up for themselves? Who is going to recognize the signs of a downfall, of an issue, of a problem? Who is going to stop them? Only someone who can be with an idea long enough can encounter all its facets and nuances. My favorite rapper, Earl Sweatshirt, recently released an album called Live, Laugh, Love. And of course, this phrase, live, laugh, love, is what we've seen in these horrible home goods, wooden signs and throw pillows, and it's so deeply cringy, yet in one way, embracing that cliche and living it is something that is powerful in and of itself. I think that the ironic stance that we have taken towards a lot of things has reduced our ability to be authentic and vulnerable. Because, going back to where we started with Infinite Jest, an awareness of the cage can itself be a cage, even though there's an important caveat here. Social media has transformed vulnerability into a type of currency. In a video by the Institute of Arts and Ideas, cultural theorist Catherine Liu outlines it.
There is a pressure to expose oneself and to remain in constant contact with social media, to leverage one's trauma and its publicity for eyeballs. And I think it's enormously destructive on the personal level and on the political.
Pain, confession, trauma, personal revelation have become part of identity politics. And the monetization of trauma by way of content, branding, and identity performance of lived experience has created this theater of empathy. It's the sense of virtue signaling as opposed to authentically being involved with things. So I think that vulnerability and authenticity are important, but they cannot be commodified. And so in a world where performative vulnerability is valued, I wonder if we can still be in these constructed selves authentically vulnerable, which complements the question of the constructed self as well as the networked self. Can we reveal ourselves or encounter ourselves authentically if we know that the self is constructed? Is authenticity inherently naive? And honestly, I think that question of sincerity may be the start of the next literary movement. The next discovery might not be a theory of reality. It may be a new way of inhabiting reality after all these theories have been dismantled. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it. Do you prefer modernism or postmodernism? What's your favorite postmodernist work? Let me know in the comments. And where do you think literature is headed next? Do you think that there's hope, or are ye of little faith? Thanks again, and read on.